swear the air itself hummed with unease. It was like stepping into a nightmare you couldn't wake up from. The path ahead twisted and turned, vanishing into an oppressive darkness that seemed to swallow sound. This wasn't a forest I recognized, not with those gnarled, skeletal trees and the ground whispering secrets I didn't want to hear. I'd been hiking, sure, but I hadn't seen anything like this before. The trail I'd been following simply ended, or rather, transformed into something else entirely. The silence was unnerving. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, just the soft crunch of my boots on the unseen path. The deeper I went, the more distorted the trees became, twisting into grotesque shapes that resembled tortured figures. I felt watched, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling with an unseen gaze. It was like the forest itself was alive, breathing, and I was trespassing on sacred ground. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the oppressive quiet. A faint whisper reached my ears, so soft I almost dismissed it as the wind. But there was no wind. I stopped, straining to hear, and the whisper came again, a sibilant murmur that seemed to slither through the fog. It sounded like a voice, but distorted, inhuman. It spoke my name. A chill ran down my spine, icy and sharp. I spun around, searching the fog, but saw nothing. Just the twisted trees and the swirling mist. But the whisper continued, growing louder, closer. I started to run. Blindly, desperately pushing through the clinging fog, the whispers chasing me. The ground felt uneven beneath my feet, roots and stones tripping me. I stumbled, falling to my knees, the damp earth cold against my skin. The whispers were all around me now, a chorus of disembodied voices, each one repeating my name, marking me, urging me forward. I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in ragged gasps, the taste of fear bitter in my mouth. I saw a light, a flickering, ethereal glow in the distance, cutting through the oppressive darkness. Hope surged through me, a desperate lifeline in this sea of fear. I ran towards it, the whispers fading slightly behind me, replaced by the pounding of my own blood in my ears. The closer I got, the brighter the light became, revealing a clearing in the fog. In the center stood a single figure, bathed in the eerie luminescence. It was a woman, dressed in flowing white robes, her face hidden by a deep hood. She raised a hand, beckoning me closer. Hesitation gnawed at me. There was something unsettling about her, something unnatural, but the whispers had returned, louder than before, pushing me forward, urging me to reach her. I took a tentative step, then another, drawn in by an unseen force. As I approached, the woman lowered her hood, revealing a face of ethereal beauty. But her eyes were empty, devoid of life, like two black pits staring into my soul. A wave of nausea washed over me, the whispers intensifying, a cacophony of voices screaming in my head. I stumbled back, trying to break free from the unseen force that held me captive, but it was too late. The woman smiled, a slow, predatory grin that sent shivers down my spine. She reached out and touched my forehead, her fingers icy cold against my skin. The whispers exploded in my mind, blinding, deafening, consuming. I screamed, a silent scream trapped within the confines of my skull. The world around me began to dissolve, the trees twisting and melting into the fog, the ground disappearing beneath my feet. I felt myself falling, tumbling into an endless abyss of darkness. The whispers were all that remained, a chorus of voices echoing in the void. They were no longer calling my name, but something else. A different name, a name I didn't recognize, but somehow it felt familiar. I landed on something solid, the impact jarring me. I opened my eyes, blinking against the dim light. I was standing in a clearing, surrounded by those same twisted trees. The fog was gone, the whispers were gone, but something was different. I looked down at my hands. They were pale, skeletal, almost translucent. I looked up, my gaze drawn to a figure standing at the edge of the clearing. It was the woman in white, her empty eyes staring at me. She smiled again, that same predatory grin. "Welcome home," she whispered, her voice now clear, chillingly familiar. "We've been waiting for you." I felt a strange sense of belonging, as if I had always been here, as if this was where I was meant to be. The memory of my former life, the life before the forest, flickered like a dying ember, fading into the darkness. I reached up and touched my face, my fingers tracing the contours of my cheekbones. My skin felt cold, papery. I looked down at my clothes. They were gone, replaced by the same flowing white robes as the woman. The woman took my hand, her touch no longer icy, but strangely comforting. "Come," she said, her voice soft, melodic. "It's time to join the others." She led me deeper into the forest, the twisted trees parting before us like a welcoming embrace. And as we walked, I heard the whispers again. But this time they weren't calling my name. They were calling the names of others, lost souls trapped in this labyrinth of twisted trees and ethereal fog. And I was one of them now, welcoming the new lost souls. I should have known better than to wander into Whisperwind Glade after dusk. My grandmother's warnings echoed in my ears, tales of mischievous sprites and bargains gone wrong. But the lure of the glowing moonflowers, their petals shimmering like captured starlight, was too strong to resist. Curiosity, it's always been my downfall. I remember the air growing cold, the usual chirping crickets falling silent. A stillness settled, heavy and expectant, like the world was holding its breath. He was impassably beautiful, tall and slender, with skin like alabaster and eyes that shone like emeralds. A crown of woven thorns sat atop his head, and his smile, it promised both delight and devastation. He called himself the Fey Prince, ruler of this hidden realm. He offered me power, knowledge, anything I desired, in exchange for a simple favor. At the time, it seemed like a small price to pay. I was young, foolish, and blinded by ambition. He asked for a lock of my hair, a token of our agreement. I laughed, relieved at the simplicity of the request. I pulled a strand from my head, offered it to him with a flourish. He took it, his touch sending a shiver down my spine, a cold that settled deep in my bones. He smiled again, and the world shimmered, twisted, and then settled back into place, subtly different. I felt changed, like a string had been plucked within me, resonating with an unfamiliar power. The next morning, I woke up with a strange clarity. I could recall complex equations from my studies with perfect accuracy. I could paint masterpieces that rivaled the old masters. My music resonated with a newfound depth and emotion. The Fey Prince had kept his word. I was gifted, brilliant, beyond anything I had ever imagined. But something felt off. My friends started acting strangely. They'd stare at me, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. They'd whisper behind their backs, their words laced with an unsettling reverence. They called me prodigy, genius, touched by the divine. But their admiration felt hollow, tainted with something sinister. My grandmother, bless her soul, saw the truth. She looked at me with pity in her eyes, her voice trembling as she warned me about the dangers of Fey magic. She said the gifts they offer are never free, that they always demand a greater price in the end. She urged me to break the pact, to return to the glade, and beg the Fey Prince for forgiveness. I scoffed at her warnings, blinded by my newfound abilities. I told her she was being superstitious, that I had everything under control. But her words, laced with fear and desperation, gnawed at me. Doubt, like an insidious weed, began to take root in my mind. Then the nightmares began. Visions of twisted creatures dancing in the moonlight, whispering promises of power and glory. I wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding like a drum against my ribs. The dreams felt real, more real than reality itself. My gifts started to warp, twisting into something grotesque. My paintings became nightmarish depictions of writhing limbs and vacant eyes. My music turned discordant, filled with unsettling melodies that echoed the whispers from my dreams. My brilliance was becoming a curse. One morning, I woke to find my hands stained with a strange, iridescent dust. It shimmered like crushed moonflowers, emitting a faint, sickly sweet scent. I tried to wash it off, but it wouldn't budge. It was under my skin, a part of me now. I knew then that I had to go back to Whisperwind Glade. I had to break the pact, no matter the cost. Fear, cold and sharp, gripped my heart. I knew, deep down, that the Fey Prince wouldn't let me go easily. He was waiting for me. The same chilling smile played on his lips, the same emerald eyes burning with an unsettling intensity. He knew why I had come. I begged him to release me, to take back his gifts. He laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a graveyard. He said a bargain is a bargain, and fey bargains are never broken. He reached out, his hand brushing against my cheek. The iridescent dust on my skin shimmered, pulsed. He leaned in close, his voice a silken whisper. "You are mine now," he said, "body and soul." And then I understood the true nature of his gift. It wasn't brilliance or talent or power. It was a curse, a slow, agonizing transformation. I looked down at my hands, the iridescent dust now spreading up my arms, consuming me. I felt my features shifting, my bones reshaping. I was becoming something else, something fey. And as my own emerald eyes stared back at me from the reflection in his gaze, I realized the horrifying truth. I wasn't replacing anyone in his court. I never believed in curses. Thought they were old wives' tales, campfire stories to scare kids, until I found that sword. It was tucked away in my grandfather's attic, beneath a pile of moth-eaten tapestries gleaming faintly in the dust motes. An ornate thing, hilt wrapped in blackened leather, the blade etched with symbols I couldn't decipher. There was a weight to it, a presence that made the hairs on my arms stand up. It felt wrong, but there was also a pull, a dark fascination. I picked it up. The first night I had it, I dreamt of a swirling abyss, an endless black void filled with whispers that seemed to claw at my sanity. In the dream, I was holding the sword, pointing it towards the darkness, and the whispers intensified, morphing into guttural growls, full of rage and hunger. I woke up in a cold sweat, the sword lying beside me on the bed. The room was bathed in the pale light of the moon, and the symbols on the blade seemed to shift and writhe as I watched. The dreams continued, each night more vivid, more terrifying. The abyss grew closer, the whispers louder. I started seeing shadows flicker in the periphery of my vision, hearing scratching sounds in the walls when no one else was home. My reflection in the mirror began to look different, gaunter, the eyes sunken and shadowed. I felt a constant, gnawing hunger, not for food, but for something else, something I couldn't name. I tried to get rid of the sword. I buried it in the garden, wrapped in layers of cloth. But the next morning, it was back in my room, lying on my pillow as if placed there gently. I tried throwing it in the river, but the water seemed to reject it, pushing it back to the bank. It was as if the sword was bound to me, and I to it. The fear was a constant companion now, a cold hand gripping my heart. One night, I woke up to find myself standing in my grandfather's attic, the sword in my hand. I didn't remember getting up, didn't remember leaving my room. The attic was darker than I remembered, filled with a suffocating silence. Then, a voice whispered my name, coming from the deepest shadows. It was a voice that promised power, knowledge, release. It was the voice from the abyss. The voice told me the symbols on the sword were a language, the language of the abyss. It told me the sword was a key, a gateway. It told me I could unlock unimaginable power if I simply accepted its gift. The temptation was overwhelming, a dark siren song pulling me towards the edge of madness. My hand tightened around the hilt of the sword. I started translating the symbols. It was a slow, agonizing process, each new word a sliver of ice driven into my soul. They spoke of ancient rituals, of sacrifices, of a being that hungered for release from its prison beyond the veil. The more I learned, the more the world around me seemed to fray at the edges, reality itself becoming thin and brittle. The whispers were constant now, a chorus of voices inside my head, urging me on, guiding my hand as I prepared the ritual. I gathered the ingredients, herbs, candles, a small silver bowl. I felt a detached sense of purpose, as if I was merely a puppet acting out a preordained script. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, empty anticipation. The ritual began. I chanted the words I had translated, the language of the abyss flowing from my lips like venom. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with a palpable energy. The shadows in the room deepened, coalescing into swirling masses of darkness. I felt a presence behind me, vast and ancient, and I knew the gateway was opening. A clawed hand reached out from the darkness, its skin like polished obsidian. It grasped the silver bowl, its touch sending a jolt of icy power through my body. The whispers intensified, becoming a deafening roar. The abyss was here. I felt myself being pulled forward towards the swirling vortex of darkness. The room around me dissolved, replaced by the endless black void of my dreams. The whispers promised power, knowledge, release. But all I felt was terror, a primal, gut-wrenching fear that froze me to my core. I realized in that moment of stark terror that the voice had lied. There was no power, no knowledge, no release. There was only consumption, oblivion, the endless hunger of the abyss, and I was about to be devoured. With a desperate surge of will, I pulled back, wrenching myself free from the abyss's grasp. The clawed hand vanished, the whispers faded, and the room snapped back into focus. I was on my knees, gasping for breath, the sword lying beside me, its blade now dull and lifeless. The abyss was gone, but the experience had changed me. I could still feel its presence lurking just beyond the veil, waiting. I knew it would be back, and I knew with chilling certainty that next time I might not be so lucky. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My face was still gaunt, my eyes still shadowed, but something else was there too, a flicker of hunger, a darkness that mirrored the abyss. And in the reflection's hand I saw it, the sword, back in its grasp, back where it belonged.